Well, viewers have been asking for them, so here are some VYou short videos from when I was on the now defunct VYou social media website, little short 2-minute clips that all have to do with religion in one way or another. And when I started going through them, I found that I had some that were more general, more broad in topics, so I've gathered those into here. These aren't quite so much about my own particular views or about very specific topics. Some of those will come in the next 2 videos that I'm going to assemble out of VYou clips. So you could call this sort of general remarks about religion. Again, it's very important to keep in mind these are my own personal views. I'm not saying that anybody else has to hold them. I'm not a theologian. I'm a philosopher who strays into theology, sometimes by mistake and sometimes by design. So here you are. Well, when I taught world religions and then I taught specific classes on different religious traditions, I found different aspects sometimes of religions that I was very interested in. You know, for instance, I was interested in Islamic legal theory and in a few other aspects, you know, hadith interpretation. When it came to Buddhism, I was very interested in the move from Theravada Buddhism to Mahayana Buddhism and where all these new doctrines came about. I was very interested in Aztec religion and the complex system that really they just came in and brought in an overlay on the Mesoamerican religious system that was already in place, and this complex, you know, interrelation between different gods and different rituals and all that. Anything that has a philosophical tradition usually gets my attention. So that's there. When it comes to Christianity, you know, I'm very interested in monasticism, both Eastern and Western. And I'm interested in what we call monastic theology, and I'm interested in Christian philosophy. I'm also interested in religious experience, and that goes across different faiths as well. We do some comparative stuff, and I'm interested in the conception of time. And what else? Oh, in moral codes and in comparison between them, and especially not just in the moral codes, but in the interpretation of moral codes and how communities carry that out and what sort of reasoning processes they use. You know, for instance, if you want to live out a monastic life, how do you apply the disciplinary rules? So there we go. This is a very provocative question and a good one. I'm not so sure it's a good one for VYou as such, because I'm not going to be able to answer it to anybody's satisfaction in 2 minutes. But it's a very good one, and I think I will do a Dr. Sadler Chalk and Talk about this. I say it's provocative because it's very boldly and starkly put and tied in very closely with that. It's also, you might say, highly equivocal. That means that these two terms, God and logic, can mean an awful lot of things. So if I answer the question about, you know, this conception of God and this conception of logic, that may have nothing to do with other conceptions of God or other conceptions of logic. And I'm just going to stick with the logic side. Usually when somebody asks a question like this, they're asking, is God, you know, and the things that we think about and say about God, are those compatible with some sort of logic? So now if you mean something like formal symbolic logic, the kind of stuff that we teach in, you know, philosophy 210 logic classes and you can buy textbooks about, the answer is not really no, the answer is just yeah, because propositions about God would be like any other propositions. Formal logic is not interested in the actual content of propositions and the ideas that it's working with. It's only interested in the pure form of it. That's actually very dull, I find. I have to preface that. I was very interested in that as an undergraduate, and I explored it as fully as I could. But
if you're interested in substantive things, then you have to go to more substantive logics, and you have thinkers like, say, for example, dialectical thinkers, Hegel, and then of course Marx. There's logics there. Dewey, John Dewey, very explicit logic. In a different vein, Maurice Blondel, Benedetto Croce. These are all people who work out logics, and some of them, yes, God fits in integrally, and some of them, God's incompatible. In what ways can faith be the handmaiden to reason and not its antithesis, as it seems to strike me sometimes? So I'm wondering, first off, if perhaps when I was being asked this, if something got garbled in the positioning of things, because usually the question is, in what ways can reason be the handmaid to faith? So I'm going to answer this looking at how it was actually phrased, and not, the more typical, how can faith and reason work together for the good of the faith or human person or something like that. I'm going to assume that what you wrote is actually what you meant. In what way can faith be the handmaiden to reason? So what this is assuming is that reason is in some way greater than faith, that it provides a more publicly shareable, debatable, it's hard not to use the word reason or rationality here, ways of getting at things, the phenomena that we encounter, the world, ourselves, what lies beyond appearances, God, if God exists, all that sort of thing. But the governing assumption here would that be that reason somehow trumps or takes the cake, and that faith, then, meaning religious faith of some sort of determinate sort, could serve reason. Well, this often seems to be the case of some of the more liberal churches, where they've almost evacuated all the traditional religious doctrines and commitments and things like that in favor of just what a particular shape of human reason can give. John Dewey does this too in his work, and a lot of other rationalists do this. I'm not big on that project myself.
Did I stop believing in God when I left the church, as my questioner did? Do I find that I must now choose to believe in a God? Did I stop believing in God when I left the church? No. I still did continue to believe in God, but it was a very vague notion. And like I said in a previous question, my catechesis was terrible, as was most of my generation and my experience. Nobody who was teaching us actually knew much or thought about much. They weren't intellectuals. They had very little to nourish us with. And there was too much hippy-dippy, God is love, which is true, but that's not all the picture, right? There's too much weak milk rather than meat to feed upon. And I did continue to believe in God, and I actually did continue to pray occasionally. And I did come back to the church, too, and it was coming back through engagement with actual people that I knew who were good models and who were also intellectuals, and also reading people like St. Anselm and St. Thomas Aquinas, especially as I started reading them in Latin. So no, I never really stopped believing in God, but my idea of God was often very vague and imperfect. Like Augustine says, if that's the case, you're not really grasping God, you're grasping some idol of your own mind. Do I find that I now must choose to believe in a God? No, it's a gut level thing, and I don't have to choose it, but I think somewhere along the line I did have to make some intellectual choices, I think that a lot of the times when people are theists or atheists, a lot of that is volitional. It's not because they absolutely find some reasons convincing. They choose to find those reasons convincing. And so I think that people like Blaise Pascal and William James and Maurice Blondel actually are right when they notice that the will has a role in that. How can you believe in God when there's so much evidence against him? Well, there isn't, actually. I think that you might be confused about what actually counts as evidence through not understanding the nature of science, which is often adduced as evidence. But the science is about the phenomenal world. It doesn't deal with metaphysical issues or theological issues. And when scientists stray into that territory, they generally do pretty poor work. A lot of what counts as evidence when people start talking about these sort of stuff is frankly not evidence at all, and a lot of it's quite tendentious and requires you to make too many big assumptions. For instance, naturalism is an assumption. It's not a proven fact or something like that. The idea that miracles cannot happen. And I'm not saying I believe in any particular miracle, but the idea that miracles can't happen. That's a philosophical position that people just take without realizing they're doing so as an assumption. The problem of evil is a better way to try to attack belief in God, if that's your goal. But if you actually look at real religious traditions and what their texts deal with, you'll find that they grapple with the problem of evil pretty early on. So I think if you do some digging around reading, just read the Psalms, for example. You'll find the psalmist not only meditating on the problem of evil, but actually acknowledging that at one point he's tempted to think there is no God. And a lot of people think that religious believers are not very sophisticated in their belief. And there's a lot who aren't, right? Who the simple, those of childlike faith. But, those aren't the ones actually writing scriptures. So there's not a lot of evidence against God, any more than there's a lot of evidence, in some sort of scientific sense for God. So I don't have a problem believing in God. Okay, so this is my third try recording this because I gotta say, in all my years of teaching philosophy and religious studies, I have never come across something quite as trivial as this, put out as some sort of evidence for a huge claim. And I don't want to seem condescending or anything like that. I'm just telling you, if your goal is to actually convince anybody of anything, this ain't going to work. I mean, whose religious faith actually depends on whether in the Bible it says pi is 3 or 3.14, etc., etc., etc.? Nobody I know. No actual religious adherent, and I don't know anybody who's a secularist because it says that in the Bible either. I mean, people have real reasons for being on the side of religion or on the side of secularism. This ain't it. I would suggest that if this is really the sort of thing that you want to get into, I'm not the guy to discuss it with you. I think there's a lot of other people on VYou who probably would get into this. So I would use the search function and find them. I'm perfectly willing to talk about arguments for and against God's existence, but this ain't an argument. This is just triviality.
Are there any religions in which there's a God who's nothing more than an observer? Have I come across anything like that? Yeah, actually I have. And in a couple different aspects. You can find in ancient Greek philosophy the notion that the divine is actually disconnected from the world of human affairs. They observe the natural world, but they don't actually take any action in it. That is done by lesser entities called the daimones, and that's a position that you find in Middle Platonism and in some Stoic cosmology. The Epicureans also believe that the gods, if they exist, care nothing about human beings, and they actually engage in arguments with the Stoics about that. Because some Stoics actually held the gods actually do care. Of course, if you fast forward to more modern times, you have deism, this notion that there's a creator God who creates the universe and implants within it sort of natural laws, and also implants within human beings the capacity to discover moral laws. which are also, as far as they're concerned, facts of nature. But then once he does so, there is no involvement. He can't even really be said to be a watcher. He's been called the watchmaker god. He sets up the universe like a complex watch and then just winds it up and lets it go. Are there other examples like that? Yeah, in some of the world religions you can find people who maintain the gods are not particularly interested because they're too busy being gods and enjoying themselves, and to be involved with human beings and human affairs would actually be a detriment to them. But I'm about to run out of time, so I've got to wrap it up.
Well, I think you've got two different topics here, both of which I'm very happy to talk about. And so you're asking, do you think children should be taught about religion in school? And then you say, as well as being taught about evolution. So I'm guessing that what you mean is, should children be taught the creationist account of the origins of things in addition to what passes for the theory of evolution after we really boil it down and kind of simplify it for grade school kids. Well, that's one issue. I'm going to put that aside, actually, because the one that I'm really interested in is, do you think children should be taught about religion in school? And my answer is definitely yes, 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 yes. And here's why. The Supreme Court actually was very, very clear on this. There's a huge distinction between religious studies, where you're actually learning about religion, generally somebody else's religion, and theology or any sort of proselytizing, right? So the religious studies where you're developing understanding of religion, but you're not dealing with any sort of commitments, you're not requiring any commitments, you're not pushing any agenda. And then an explicitly committed theological position, on the other hand, that says, we want you to believe this is the right way. And the Supreme Court has said, not only can you teach religion in school, but you're actually doing the children a huge disservice if you're not teaching religion in school, religious studies, not actually adopting a position, but teaching about religion. Because think about it, can you understand history adequately if you don't understand religion? Absolutely not. Can you even understand literature, until you get to the 20th century? Probably not. There's so many things that make more sense when you've studied religion. So I think we should be teaching kids about religion in school. So this is a really interesting question for a few reasons. One is you picked something that can't be answered in 2 minutes, that actually we take like a whole semester if you wanted to do well. The other is it's not one of those questions that's well put, but does reflect the way a lot of people think about religion, as if religion is just a set of propositions and one is more right and the other is, less right, and it's just a matter of getting facts right or something like that. And there's a lot more to it than that. I myself believe, and I belong to a church that believes, that Christianity is most correct in its understanding of the nature of God, but that other religions actually get quite a few things right, and that inter-religious dialogue is very important. So what I can actually tell you about in the brief space that I have here is how I ended up coming back to the church. Probably not a way that a lot of other people would follow. And I'm not claiming that my way has universal validity as why I believe that Christianity is the best way. Quite frankly, I came back to the church through philosophy, through studying people like Blaise Pascal and Maurice Blondel and Søren Kierkegaard and Thomas Aquinas and, of course, St. Anselm, who I do a lot of work on. And I do a lot of work on him because I love the guy. And I think he's right on a lot of things, and I just want to keep studying his thought the rest of my life. And what was he motivated by? He had experiences in his life of the rationality behind the monastic life, and he just wanted to keep exploring it. So you could say it's something like an intellectual experience. And I don't expect everyone to share that, but it is there, and other people have had it, and it's very fruitful. The key thing is to actually removing impediments to being able to have those sorts of intellectual experiences. And not to expect too much. So this is in response to a comment. I find it interesting how open-ended the Christian Bible's God's goal for mankind seems to be. Yeah, exactly. I do too. As a matter of fact, that's part of what attracts me to that whole notion. It is open-ended. It is all-encompassing. It includes so much. Very different than what I was taught when I was a kid about what God wanted or God's ideas were, which to me seemed very boring and very closed in and very much requiring me to turn off parts of myself, which didn't turn out to be the case at all. God actually, what does God want according to the biblical view? God wants human beings to be happy, to realize their full potential, to work out their issues, to live in peace, where peace is not just everybody getting to do whatever they want, but actually harmonizing their wills with each other. God wants reconciliation. God wants justice to flow down. All these sorts of things. And it's interesting. You can't bring it all under. This is actually a good point. I didn't think of this before. You cannot bring anything that's really, really valuable all under one single univocal, one concept fits all head. You have a plurality of goods, and the Christian Bible's God, and I think actually you can make this the case for God as understood through the Quran as well, wants all of these rightly ordered, connected in the right way for humankind. Now, that's a beautiful thought, and that's part of what attracted me back to Christianity and to the church in which I connect up with God through the sacraments and through prayer. So yeah, great question.